"He's just a worthless waiter," my son-in-law said during the wedding. Those words cut me to the core because I loved him like my own son. But when he found out who I used to be, he turned pale with shock. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments the city you are watching from so that I can see how far my story has spread. My name is Henry Caldwell. I had been polishing the family heirloom since dawn, as if the more I buffed the gold, the more courage I could rub into myself. It was my father's pocket watch, solid gold, with a delicate engraving of a compass on the back and an inscription inside. Time is the truest inheritance. My grandfather had passed it to my father to me, and now it was meant for my only daughter, Anna, on her wedding day. I told myself this visit would be a happy one. After all, I was about to give my girl a piece of family history older than both of us combined. But the moment Alex opened the door, I knew happiness wasn't on the menu. Alex, my soon-to-be son-in-law, immaculate as always. Hair perfectly styled, suit sharp enough to cut glass, shoes polished to a mirror shine. His smile was tight enough to snap in half. "Henry," he said, like the word was bitter on his tongue, "we weren't expecting you this early." I stepped inside, careful not to track in any of the wet spring dirt clinging to my shoes. Their house smelled faintly of expensive candles, vanilla musk with some undertone I couldn't name, but underneath it was a different scent, one I knew too well: disapproval. I wanted to give Anna something before the big day. I held up the small velvet box like an offering. "It's a family heirloom." His eyes flicked to the box and back to my face, one brow arching. "That's thoughtful. But you really didn't need to come all the way over here. We're extremely busy with wedding preparations. Important guests to coordinate." Pressed to handle, his tone suggested that I didn't fall into any category marked important. Footsteps pounded on the stairs. Anna came bounding down, still in a wrinkled shirt like she'd just rolled out of bed. Her hair was slightly messy. My girl never had much patience for combs. And the sight of her made my chest ache with the same fierce love I'd felt since the first time I held her. "Dad, you're here." She pulled me into a hug before I could reply. "Is that—" Her eyes widened when she saw the box. "Your grandfather's pocket watch," I said, pressing it into her hands. "It's yours now. He wanted you to have it on your wedding day." Before she could even open it, Alex's hand landed lightly on her arm. "Darling, maybe we should put that somewhere safe," he said, voice dripping with the kind of false sweetness I'd learned to distrust. "You know, so it doesn't get lost during all the chaos." Anna frowned. "It's not going to get lost, Alex. It's important." Alex didn't answer her directly. Instead, he turned to me with a look that belonged more in a boardroom than a family living room. "Henry, we need to be mindful about tomorrow. The guest list is very high profile. Influential people. Media. It's important we present a certain image." I blinked at him. And, he hesitated. Then his lips curved into a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Your profession. It's respectable in its own way, of course, but perhaps not something that should be a focus tomorrow. We wouldn't want the conversation to drift." I felt the heat creep up my neck. "You mean the fact that I work at a diner?" He tilted his head, as if I'd proved his point. "You're a career waiter. I'm sure some of the guests wouldn't understand. We just want the day to be about us, not about, well," he gave a small shrug. "You understand." I glanced at my daughter. "Do you agree with him?" Anna's jaw tightened. "Dad, you're my father. I want you there." End of story. Alex's fingers tapped lightly on her forearm, a rhythmic little sound that felt like manipulation. "Anna, it's not about keeping him away. It's about managing the narrative. You know how people talk. It hit me then. He wasn't embarrassed about me. He was embarrassed of me. I forced a smile, though my insides were tightening like a fist. Well, I said, trying to keep my voice light, I wouldn't want to shame anyone with my presence. Alex didn't bother denying the word. He just smiled, victorious. Anna's protest was immediate. Dad, you're not. But I cut her off with a pat on her arm. It's fine. I'll think about it. The lie tasted like metal in my mouth. I left with my heart heavier than the watch had ever been. Outside, the spring air was sharp with the smell of rain on asphalt. My shoes clicked against the wet driveway, each step louder than the last. In the driver's seat, I just sat there, fingers clenched around the steering wheel. His words kept replaying. A shame for the guests. Managing the narrative. You understand? Oh, I understood. I understood exactly what he thought of me. A man in a diner apron, pouring coffee for truckers and retirees, someone to be tolerated at family dinners, but hidden from the polished people he called friends. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I'd made my decision. I would not miss my daughter's wedding. But I also wouldn't arrive as the humble waiter Alex thought he could shove into a corner. I walked inside, set my purse on the counter, and poured myself a cup of coffee. The kitchen felt too quiet. The hum of the refrigerator loud in the silence. I traced the rim of my mug, thinking, if he wanted to play this game, I could play it better. Because Alex didn't know everything about me. He didn't know the other parts of my life, the ones that didn't fit neatly into his little hierarchy of worth. And when the wedding day came, I'd make sure he and every one of his important guests found out. The morning after my visit to Anna's house, I sat at the small oak table in my kitchen, the same table where I'd fed her scrambled eggs before school, where we'd celebrated birthdays with lopsided cakes I baked after my late shifts at the diner. The smell of yesterday's coffee still lingered, bitter and stale, a perfect match for the pit in my stomach. I opened my old checkered ledger, a habit I'd never given up, even after the world moved on to phone apps and online banking. The pages were worn thin, the ink fading in places, but each number, each notation, was a record of a sacrifice I'd made for my daughter. 22 years of working double shifts as a waiter. Not glamorous, not easy. My hands had deep lines from years of scrubbing coffee cups and lifting trays. My feet ached in ways that never fully went away. But every aching step, every missed holiday, had been for her. I ran my finger down the columns. Anna's braces, $3,200. Her first car, $5,000. College tuition, $48,000 over 4 years. Graduate school loan payoff, $27,000. And the little things in between. New shoes when she joined the basketball team, the suit she wore to her first job interview, the deposit on her first apartment when her life fell apart after that early breakup. I'd been there every time she stumbled. Not because I was obligated, but because that's what fathers do. But now she had let that man, my soon-to-be son-in-law, look at me as if I were dirt under his shoe. He'd dismiss my life's work with a sneer, like being a waiter was something to be ashamed of. I closed the ledger, my jaw tight. If Alex thought he could erase me from my daughter's wedding, our day, he was wrong. I wasn't going to let him decide where I belonged. But I also knew I couldn't just walk in through the front door as an uninvited guest. No, he'd made that impossible. A different idea began to form, slow but steady, like a pot coming to a simmer. If I couldn't be there as a guest, I'd be there as something else, someone he wouldn't even think to ban. I picked up the phone and dialed Tony. Tony and I went way back, 30 years, to when he was a dishwasher in the same diner where I waited tables. He'd moved on, bought his own Italian restaurant, and turned it into one of the most respected eateries in the city. We'd kept in touch over the years. He'd always called me Hank, even when my hair turned silver. Tony's Trattoria, came his familiar voice. Tony, it's Henry, I said, my voice low but determined. Hank, haven't heard from you in ages. You finally coming by for my lasagna? Not today, Tony. I I need a favor. A big one. There was a pause on the other end, his tone shifting instantly. Tell me. I explained everything. The wedding, Alex's insult, my plan. That I wanted to work the event, blending in with the catering staff so I could witness my daughter's day without being paraded like some charity case. He didn't even hesitate. I know a guy, runs a high-end catering company. They're doing a wedding this Saturday at the Glenmore Estate. Is that the place? Yes, I whispered, feeling my pulse quicken. I'll call him now. If he's got space, you'll be wearing black slacks and a white shirt, carrying champagne instead of sitting at some table. And Hank, you'll see it all, up close. No one will dare tell you to leave. A small smile tugged at my lips. Thank you, Tony. I owe you. You owe me nothing. We came up together. That's all that matters. When I hung up, I leaned back in my chair, letting the plan settle in my mind. The thought of Alex's face when he saw me in uniform, probably too self-absorbed to even realize what was happening, filled me with a strange, sharp satisfaction. I wasn't going to let his shame define me. I wasn't going to be erased from my own daughter's story. This wasn't just about showing up. This was about showing them who I really was. The Glenmore estate looked even grander in the morning light than I remembered from photographs. White stone walls caught the sun and reflected it in a soft glow. The wide drive was lined with cherry blossoms that had just begun to open. The air smelled faintly of fresh-cut grass and distant lilacs. I tightened my grip on my tote, the one holding my black service shoes, my apron, and tucked deep inside the golden pocket watch. Inside, the ballroom was a hive of motion. Florists adjusted towering vases of roses and orchids, each arrangement taller than the people placing them. Two young men in vests carried in a gleaming tiered wedding cake that looked as fragile as glass. A sound technician tested the microphone, his voice booming. Check 1, check 2. Lydia, the catering executive Tony had introduced me to, waved me over with a brisk smile. You'll be on glassware and flatware polish until the first table inspection. After that, I'll have you help with napkin folds. I slipped into the rhythm instantly, cloth in hand, twisting each champagne flute until it gleamed, lining them on the table so they caught the light from the chandeliers above. I'd done this kind of work 1,000 times before, but here, surrounded by glittering crystal and ivory linen, it felt almost like a performance. My hands moved quickly, automatically, freeing my mind to think about tomorrow. I was so focused on the repetition, lift, polish, set, that I didn't notice the shift in the room until it was too late. The double doors at the far end swung open, and in walked Anna. My girl, my grown woman, looked sharp in a fitted navy pantsuit, her blouse unbuttoned just enough to be stylish, hair carefully styled. She carried herself with the confident ease I'd hoped for her whole life. Behind her came Alex. Even without the tuxedo, he looked like he'd stepped straight from the pages of a groom's magazine. Crisp cream shirt, perfectly tailored trousers, and a designer watch that caught the light every time he moved his hand across the clipboard he carried. His gaze was sweeping the room, cool and assessing, until it landed on me. The pause was short but potent. I saw the exact moment recognition hit him, the faint narrowing of his eyes, the slow tilt of his head. "What?" he said, his voice slicing the air. "Is this?" Several staff members looked up from their work before quickly ducking back to it. Anna's head turned in the direction of his gaze. When her eyes found me, surprise flickered across her face. "Dad?" I straightened, setting down the glass in my hand. "Good morning," I said evenly. Just lending a hand. Alex's expression shifted into something brittle. You're working the wedding? My wedding? I'm working my daughter's wedding, I said, not breaking eye contact. Since it was made clear I wasn't welcome as a guest, he gave a short, humorless laugh. So this is your way of manipulating the situation, forcing yourself into the day under the guise of helping. Not manipulating, I said, folding my cloth neatly. I'm here as staff, doing my job. I've done this work for most of my life. It seemed like the simplest way to be part of the day without upsetting you. You've done it on purpose to embarrass me, he snapped, to prove some point. Before I could reply, Anna stepped between us. Alex, he's not hurting anything. He's literally just polishing glasses. Alex's grip on his clipboard tightened until his knuckles whitened. You don't get it. This is exactly the kind of drama I told you he'd create. I could see the frustration tightening Anna's jaw, the way it used to when she was 12 and stuck between two friends arguing on the baseball field. He's not creating drama. You are. He's here. He's working. End of story. Alex's eyes flicked around the room again, gauging the invisible audience he feared. His voice dropped, but it was no less sharp. This is my wedding, and I will not have you hijacking it. I tilted my head. Funny. I thought weddings belonged to the couple, and I thought couples invited the people who mattered most. His chin lifted, eyes flashing. You've twisted this into some martyr act. Well, enjoy it while it lasts, because by tomorrow she will stop it. The words landed like a slap, but I didn't flinch. We'll see, I said quietly. He turned on his heel, his shoes striking the marble floor in crisp, angry beats, and swept out through the double doors. Anna lingered, torn between following him and staying. Dad, I'm sorry you had to hear that. I waved her toward the door. Go after your groom. We'll finish here. She hesitated, then nodded and left, the door swinging shut behind her. The hum of work resumed, but the air still held the echo of his anger. I picked up another champagne flute and polished it until it caught the chandelier's light like a drop of captured sun. My reflection in the glass looked calm, but inside something steadier and older than anger had taken root. Alex thought he could stop me. He didn't know how many kitchens I'd survived, how many nights I'd worked through pain, exhaustion, and the smug dismissal of people who thought service was beneath them. I'd been underestimated my whole life. It was almost comfortable. I set the last glass on the table, perfectly aligned, and thought, tomorrow we'll see who really gets stopped. By the time the last crate of crystal was tucked into its place and the final chair realigned to perfection, the Glenmore estate had settled into an almost reverent hush. The chandeliers hung still, like enormous frozen teardrops, and the scent of fresh flowers lingered heavy in the air. It was nearly 7 in the evening when Lydia released the staff for the day, reminding us to arrive early tomorrow. I slipped out the service door into the cool twilight. My back ached in that familiar, stubborn way it always did after a long shift, but it was a good ache, proof that I'd earned my place in that glittering ballroom. The drive home was quiet, just the low hum of the radio and the soft rattle of my tote bag in the passenger seat. Inside was my uniform, my black shoes, and the golden pocket watch, still warm from my hand earlier when I'd checked its ticking. Tomorrow, it would sit in my apron pocket, hidden but close enough to feel. I'd just set my bag on the kitchen table when my phone buzzed. Tony's name lit up the screen. Hank, he said, the moment I answered, skipping the hello. You got a minute? You're not going to believe what happened after you left. Something in his tone made me sit down. What happened? He took a breath, the sound of his restaurant clinking and humming faintly in the background. Your future son-in-law came to see me today. I closed my eyes for a beat. Alex. Yep. Strolled into my place like he owned the lease. I swear he had the whole king of the room thing going. Hair perfect, smile perfect, cologne you could smell before you saw him. He asked for sparkling water, and the second the waitress set it down, he got right to business. I waited, my fingers curling around my coffee mug even though it was empty. Go on. He offered me money, he said flatly. A lot of it. 5 grand, cash, to pull you off the catering team tomorrow. Said it would be better for everyone if you stayed home. $5,000. That was more than 2 months' rent for me, more than my father's watch had ever been insured for. And? And I told him to take his money and use it for whatever people like him use money for. Probably silk pillowcases for their dogs. I don't sell out my friends. Despite the knot in my chest, a laugh escaped me. You're a stubborn old mule, Tony. From one mule to another, he said, and I could hear the grin in his voice. He must have been furious, I guessed. You're not wrong, he replied. His smile tightened up so much, it looked like it might snap. Then he leaned across the table and suggested that, well, life could get complicated for me if I didn't reconsider. My stomach tightened. Complicated how? You know, the song and dance. Health inspectors suddenly finding things, licensing boards looking twice at permits. He thought he was being subtle, but I've been around enough politicians' fundraisers to recognize a veiled threat when I hear one. I stood and started pacing the kitchen. He threatened you. Over me? Henry, don't start worrying about me. I've had inspectors in my kitchen every year since '98. You think I don't run a tight ship? He can send the whole fire department if he wants. I'll serve them espresso and tiramisu until they roll out of here smiling. His casual defiance made me smile, but my mind kept circling the same thought. This wasn't just a man wanting me out of his wedding because I didn't fit his picture-perfect guest list. This was someone who couldn't stand losing control of anything. He's not afraid of me, I said slowly. He's afraid of the fact that I'm not bending to him. That I'm not part of his script? Tony made a thoughtful noise. Yeah, that tracks. People like him. They plan the story before the day even happens. And you, my friend, are a plot twist. I stopped pacing and leaned against the counter, the cool laminate against my palms. Then tomorrow, I'm going to be the best damn plot twist he's ever seen. That's the Henry I know. His voice warmed. Now listen, you keep your head high tomorrow. If he so much as tries to yank you out of that ballroom, you come find me. I'm going to be in the kitchen for the dessert course, and I can make a scene louder than any groom if I have to. We said our goodnights, and when I hung up, the apartment felt different. Not empty, charged. Like every object had taken a deep breath along with me. My uniform hung on the back of the kitchen chair, pressed and ready. The shoes sat neatly by the door. I went to the mantel and picked up the pocket watch. The chain slid through my fingers, smooth and warm, the faint tick steady against my palm. My grandfather had told me once, "This isn't just gold, son. It's a reminder that time is yours to keep or to waste. Choose wisely." I slipped it back into its pouch. Alex could throw money at my friends. He could threaten and scheme. But he couldn't buy the years I'd spent raising Anna, the late nights I'd worked to keep her fed, the sheer grit that came from living life on my own 2 aching feet. Tomorrow, the lights would blaze over crystal and roses, music would fill the air, and I would be there, moving quietly, blending in, waiting. And if Alex wanted a perfect wedding, he'd have to get through me to have it. By 9 a.m., the Glenmore estate was all humming veins and polished bone. Lydia had the team in a huddle near the service corridor, while white-gloved florists slid past with peonies like scoops of whipped cream. 2 rules, she said, eyes flicking over our black-on-black uniforms. You are silent lightning, and you fix problems before a guest can name them. Silent lightning. I could do that. I tucked our family watch into the pocket sewn inside my apron and pressed the pouch flat against my hip. The tick felt like a private drum line. I smoothed my hair back, tied on my half apron, and followed the glassware captain to table 11. The day unspooled in precise motions. Lay a bread plate so the knife points in. Reset a crooked charger before anyone notices. Touch the rim of a flute with the polishing cloth until the chandelier breaks into a dozen tiny moons. Guests began to drift in like well-dressed birds, their voices a shimmer over the string quartet, hats, pearls, laughs that wanted to be photographs. I kept to the seams of the room, a shadow with a tray, and then I saw him. Alex was a monument in bespoke tailoring, the kind of suit that turns the wearer into a statement. The cut was immaculate, the fabric a deep charcoal that seemed to absorb the light, and his posture was a quiet command. People pivoted in his direction the way flowers track the sun. He ate it up, smile calibrated to sympathy when an aunt cried, to poise when the photographer barked orders. But every few minutes, like a bird sensing tremors miles away, he glanced toward the service door, toward me. I kept my eyes on the tray. Move, breathe, count. The hard things in life don't care if your hands shake. They still need carrying. The ceremony was in the conservatory, all glass and green, the aisle a river of petals. Lydia shifted half our team along the side wall, water for anyone who wilted, tissues silently presented like apparitions at the first sign of tears. I took the row near the back, angled so I could see Alex at the end of the aisle. He looked too handsome for my heart, a man carved out of years I'd paid for with feet and sleep. He bounced once on the balls of his feet and stilled himself, the way he had before T-ball, before exams, before the first job interview he nearly didn't go to until I put a coffee in his hand and said, "You already belong where you're headed, son." The quartet shifted to Pachelbel. The doors opened, heads turned in one soft motion. Anna floated. There was a murmur. I could feel it more than hear it, like the room told itself a story about perfection. She was a monument in silk and seed beads, the kind of gown that turns the wearer into a weather system. The bodice was embroidered with white-on-white vines, the skirt was a spill of light, and her veil fell like a quiet command. Instead of mine, she took her mother's arm and moved down the aisle. He didn't look at me. Not then. He didn't have to. The air between us already knew we were keeping count. Vows happened in the safe, beautiful language of ceremonies, thick with promises and forever and "I will." When the officiant asked if anyone had just cause, the room went still as a held breath. The old joke quivered in the air and died, as it should. They exchanged rings, they kissed. Applause broke like surf, rolling and pleased. Back in the ballroom, the cocktail hour swelled. I took a pass of hors d'oeuvres, tuna tartare in tiny cones, truffled arancini the color of soft gold, little lamb lollipops glistening like secrets, and slipped between clusters of conversation. I learned the ground quickly. The donors near the windows, the cousins by the bar, the bright young things in shoes they'd regret by midnight. I offered, I smiled, I refilled, and I disappeared again. At table 4, a silver-haired woman in sapphires leaned toward me. "Excuse me, sir?" Her grandson, late 20s, earnest face, tie a little too tight, hovered beside her. "She's my nonna," he said, as if that explained the world. "Her name's Teresa. We can't find her place card. Could you help me get her settled?" "Of course," I said, shifting my tray to my left hand and offering my right arm to the lady. "May I, Miss?" Teresa? Her fingers were cool and light on my forearm. "You have a kind voice," she said. "Comes with the job," I answered, walking at her pace, mind already scanning the room. The place card stands had been bumped by a florist cart. I'd seen Lydia reset them. Section C, near the band. The grandson. I'm Marco, he said, and I told him I was Henry, followed, his gratitude all over his face. We reached the cluster near the stage, and I spotted it. Teresa Donato tucked a place to the left of a gentleman I recognized as a former mayor. Here we are, I said, sliding my hand to the back of her chair, easing it out. May I? I helped her sit, tucked her shawl in gracefully, and pivoted to Marco. Would she like sparkling water or still? I'll bring both, with lemon. Still, and thank you, he said, voice thick with relief. A woman at the next table, hair like a gray crown, diamonds that had seen stories, watched the exchange and smiled. It's been years since I've seen a gentleman help a lady to her seat like that. You must have been trained properly, by life, I said lightly, and moved off to fetch the water. When I returned, Marco and Teresa weren't the only ones waiting. A small satellite of eyes had found me, curious, warm, noticing. Not the gawking attention of gossip, but the kind that takes measure and adjusts its idea of you by one notch up. I placed the glasses, turned them so the lemon faced her like a little sun, and checked the height of her napkin, the angle of her bread plate. Details tell people that they matter. Bless you, she said, and patted my hand. I felt it like benediction. I floated on. The band slid into a Sinatra standard. Someone laughed like ice in crystal. At the edge of the dance floor, Alex paused for a photo with his groomsman, chin angled exactly so. The flash popped. He lowered his hands and, as if a magnet tugged him, looked across the room to the seam where staff entered from the corridor. His gaze snagged on me. Not long, just enough. I lifted my tray and moved. I had passed the point of flinching. Problems wrote themselves and I erased them. A wobble under table 8, folded napkin, shim under the leg. A candle guttering in a draft, subtle pivot of the vase. A guest's hem caught on a chair. Finial, 2 fingers, a smile, freedom as if by magic. When a boy with whipped cream hair slipped his hand toward a truffle tower, I tipped the tray toward him conspiratorially and offered an arancini instead. Chef's secret, I whispered. He beamed. By the time the first course landed, the room had conspired to like me. Not as a person, no one asked my last name, but as a presence with good timing and gentle hands. There are worse ways to be known. At the head table, Anna's best woman toasted. The mic squeaked. Laughter, honest and ugly beautiful, broke through the varnish for a moment. Anna's shoulders loosened. She looked out over the guests, and for a fraction of a second, toward the aisle where staff moved like currents. I was there. A black ribbon in the river. The pocket watch tapped against my hip when I pivoted. That patient tick-tick that had outlived 3 wars and more family arguments than I could bear to count. I pressed the pouch flat with my palm and felt steadier. Midway through the salad course, a woman in plum silk put up a hand, eyes wide. I knew that signal. Medication needed with food, or a nut allergy hiding in a garnish. I drifted to her. Everything all right? Walnuts, she breathed, hand at her throat. I knelt to her level, calm as a prayer. We've got you. Don't touch your plate. I'll replace it and notify the kitchen. I lifted the plate with a magician's sleeve, swapped in a safe one, and caught Lydia's eye from across the room, drawing a point in the air the way we'd been trained. By the time I returned with a tiny note for the band to announce no nuts and desserts, the woman's color had returned. Her partner squeezed my forearm. Thank you, he said. Really. It is a strange thing to be invisible and noticed at once, to not exist in the family photos and yet hold the night together with your hands. During a lull before the entree, I drifted past the bar to refill my water and caught Tony's reflection in the back mirror. He wore a borrowed chef coat, sleeves rolled, hair covered, grin rakish. He lifted a sugar tong at me like a salute. I felt laughter rise, unexpected and clean. He mouthed, "You okay?" I tipped my chin. The answer was yes. At the far end of the room, Alex's planner, a whip-thin woman with a headset and the energy of a metronome, counted down the first dance in finger taps. The bandleader nodded. The lights softened. Alex walked to the center, his suit sharp and clean, and Anna held out her hand. They were beautiful there, in that island of attention. She mouthed something only he could hear. His smile lifted, soft and real for once. And for a breath, I wished him well with my whole, battered heart. Then he looked toward the service corridor again, that reflex he couldn't smother. Our eyes met across a field of sequins and glass. I didn't drop my gaze. I didn't smirk. I didn't vanish. I did what I've done my entire life when someone tried to tell me I didn't belong. I turned and helped the grandfather rise from his chair. He was elegant in an old-school way. Wingtip shoes polished to a sermon, cufflinks that probably had stories. His grandson, another earnest boy, not Marco, freckles like constellations, hovered. "Could you?" "He wants to watch the dance up close." "Of course," I said, sliding my hand to the gentleman's elbow. "We'll go slow." We threaded through the thicket of chairs as the band poured honey into the room. People noticed. First, the careful way I matched my stride to his. Then the way I angled him so his view cleared a tall centerpiece without making a production of it. The boy mouthed, "Thank you." The grandfather nodded, eyes glassy in the soft light, and whispered, "My Rosie loved this one." I squeezed his arm. "Then let's give it to her." When we reached the rail at the dance floor's edge, I widened his stance by an inch so he'd feel steady and took a step back. He stood there, chin up, watching two people begin a marriage to the tune that had started his own. His grandson slipped his hand into his. Around them, the room softened. Just a hair, like a lens refocusing from spectacle to meaning. And I felt it, like when a restaurant shifts from noise to hum, and you know the night will be good. People had seen me, not by name, not by seat at a table, but by what I did with my hands and the small, exact ways I carried care. The song ended. Applause scattered like confetti. The band swung brighter. Servers flowed with entrees. The heat of the room rose, glitter deepening to glow. At the head table, Alex leaned into Anna's ear. She nodded, distracted, her eyes skipping over the crowd until they snagged on me. For the first time all day, a question crossed her face, something like how and why. Braided together. She looked toward the doors, toward the path I'd chosen, and her mouth tightened with a thought she didn't speak. I topped off water at table 11 and felt more than saw the planner's headset crackle. A security guard, discreet but not invisible the way we were, had stepped inside the ballroom scanning. My spine prickled. Alex's glance snapped to me again, brighter now, like a flare. I lifted my tray. I moved. The line between seen and unseen thinned to a wire. Silent lightning, Lydia had said. I thought, I can be lightning and also a tree. I can be both the flash and the thing that stands. And as the band kicked into a brisker number and the first plates landed with a whisper, a rumor started at the bar, the kind that travels on the soft current of a room. A voice I couldn't place, amused and delighted, said it too loudly to be an accident. Wait, is that the actor from TV? Heads began to turn, slow as weather. I steadied my tray, felt the watch tap my hip, and kept walking, toward the middle of the room, toward the place where all eyes would converge. The night had finally decided to stop being polite. The ballroom was thick with light and chatter, the air rich with the mingled scent of roses and roasted lamb. The first dance had ended, plates had been cleared, and the band had drifted into something softer, music meant to draw attention toward the head table. Lydia, sharp-eyed as ever, gave our team the subtle nod, "Be ready for the toasts." I made a slow pass through the room, refilling flutes before the speeches began. My tray was balanced perfectly on my left palm, my right hand steady, the golden pocket watch pressing its calm tick against my hip. I moved through the crowd with the kind of grace you only learn from decades in service, present but invisible, always near when needed, but never in the way. The master of ceremonies stepped forward, microphone in hand, and announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for a few words from our groom." Alex rose. His suit caught the light like a still lake at sunrise, the fine wool shimmering with each shift of his shoulders. The camera flashes burst like small fireworks. He smiled warmly at the guests, a perfect host about to address his kingdom. "I just want to thank everyone who's made this day possible," he began, voice smooth and honeyed. "Our incredible florist for transforming the space, our musicians for the perfect soundtrack, and of course, my parents for their love and generosity." Polite applause. A few hears. He turned slightly, acknowledging the planner, the photographer, even the pastry chef. I expected him to move on to the next toast, but then he glanced toward me. "And I suppose," he said, pausing just long enough to draw attention, "we should also thank our catering team." I kept my back straight, my hands loose, the bottle tilted just so over a guest's glass. "It's amazing," he continued, "how much goes into a wedding. Every flower, every place setting, every glass of champagne." His lips curved into something that looked like a smile, but wasn't. "Even my wife's father is helping tonight." The words were wrapped in sugar, but the tone was steel. A few guests turned toward me, curious. Well, another pause, this one deliberate. His eyes swept the room as if pulling everyone closer for the punchline. "He's just a waiter," Alex said lightly, almost laughing. "Hasn't really achieved much beyond that. But still, it's sweet that he could be part of things in his own way." The sound in the room shifted, not silence exactly, more like a muffled drop in air pressure. I heard a champagne flute set down too firmly on crystal, a fork scrape against china. The smiles on the faces nearest him faltered, as if they'd expected a charming quip and gotten something sour instead. I felt the words hit, but I didn't let them land. Instead, I stepped to the next table, the same calm expression in place. "Would you care for a top-up?" I asked a man in a midnight blue tuxedo. His nod was quick, almost grateful for the distraction. My tray stayed balanced, my hands steady. Table by table, I poured champagne as though his words had evaporated before they reached me. A woman in emerald silk murmured as I filled her glass. That was uncalled for. She gave me a small, approving smile, the kind that says, "I see you." At the next table, a younger guest with sharp eyeliner and a sharper tongue muttered under her breath, "Bet he couldn't handle a 10-hour shift on his feet." Her date smothered a laugh and lifted his glass to me in silent toast. I didn't engage. That was the point. If Alex wanted me to flinch, he wasn't going to get the satisfaction. At the head table, Anna's jaw was clenched tight. Her eyes were locked on Alex, her hand gripping the base of her champagne flute. She leaned toward him, her lips moving in quiet, pointed words I couldn't hear over the low buzz of conversation. He kept his smile fixed, eyes forward, but I saw the faint pink rise in his cheeks. As I passed behind her, Anna reached out and brushed my arm. "Dad," she said softly, the apology heavy in her voice. "I'm so sorry." I met her gaze and gave the smallest shake of my head. "It's fine, Anna. Enjoy your wedding. Let me do my job." She hesitated, wanting to say more, but I moved on before she could. Because this wasn't just about me. This was about showing the entire room what composure looked like in the face of a deliberate slight. By the time dessert service began, the current in the room had changed. Conversations flowed again, but the glances I caught from guests were warmer now, measured in respect, not curiosity. People remembered dignity far longer than they remembered petty insults. Alex, for all his glitter and grace, didn't realize that, but I did. And in that moment, I knew. His words had done more damage to him than they ever could to me. Dessert service had just begun, the ballroom humming with the gentle clink of silver spoons on porcelain and the quiet murmur of post-dinner conversation. The air was heavy with the scent of espresso and caramelized sugar. My focus was on the mechanics. Coffee in the right hand, sugar bowl in the left, smile soft but efficient. When the shift started, it began as a low exclamation from the far corner near the bar. "Hold on, I know that man," a man in a dove-gray tux said, pointing, not rudely but with the startled certainty of someone pulling a name from deep memory. The small group around him leaned in, curious. "Who? The server?" one asked, tilting his head in my direction. "Yes, I'm telling you, he was on TV. He pulled his phone from his jacket and began tapping furiously. It's going to drive me crazy until here, Henry Caldwell." Hearing my name out loud was like tasting a forgotten flavor, familiar, bittersweet, and so far removed from my present life that for a moment it felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. "Henry Caldwell," he repeated, holding the phone up so the others could see. "He was in Shadows Over Venice, right? Golden Globe nominee, early 90s. The reaction was immediate. Another guest, a woman with a cascade of silver hair, gasped and touched her companion's arm. "Yes. Oh my goodness, I loved him in Winter's Promise. I watched it every Christmas with my sister, phones lit up around the room like a constellation coming alive. Screens filled with images I hadn't seen in decades. Me in a period gown against a backdrop of Venetian canals, my face lit by stage lights, laughing on talk shows, standing at a podium with a statuette in hand. He's right here," someone near the dance floor whispered loudly, as if the discovery were too good to keep quiet. The ripple became a current. Guests began craning their necks to see me more clearly. I heard my name repeated in pockets of conversation. "Henry Caldwell. Remember him? He was brilliant in that courtroom drama. My mother had his movie on VHS. I kept working. I poured coffee for one table, offered sugar to another, my expression calm but not unfriendly. The watch at my hip ticked steadily, anchoring me. And then, over the soft noise, came a voice I knew by heart. "Dad?" Anna was standing now, her chair pushed back. Her face was a mixture of surprise and, most unexpectedly, pride. "Is this true?" she asked quietly when I came near, as if speaking too loudly might break the moment. I looked at her and nodded once. "It's true." She shook her head slowly, a smile tugging at her lips. You were famous. You never told me I kept my voice even." "Because it didn't matter as much as you did." Her brows drew together. "You gave it all up." "For me?" "I chose," I said simply, "and I'd choose the same way again. The films were wonderful. The applause was nice, but they weren't you. You needed me at home, not on a set half a world away." For a moment, her eyes glistened. She took a step closer, her voice low. "I had no idea." "That was the point," I said softly. Around us, the swell of chatter grew. A man from table 4 approached with his phone. "Excuse me," he said, slightly breathless, "but you were incredible in The Long Winter. That scene in the snow." He stopped himself, looking almost embarrassed. "It stayed with me all these years." "Thank you," I replied. "I'm glad it meant something to you." A pair of younger guests, probably in their 20s, were already on YouTube, showing their table a grainy clip of my Golden Globe nomination. "He looks exactly the same," one whispered. almost as if I couldn't hear. The more they searched, the more animated they became, trading favorite roles, quoting lines. Even the band leader glanced over, recognition dawning in his eyes. At the head table, Alex sat very still, his champagne untouched. His smile had hardened into something brittle, like sugar left too long under a heat lamp. I returned to work, but now, when I poured coffee or refilled a glass, people met my eyes differently. Curious, respectful, even a little awed. I wasn't just a nameless server anymore. I was someone they'd once welcomed into their living rooms through a glowing screen, someone they'd rooted for, cried with, admired. Anna followed me for a moment, her voice low but fervent. "I can't believe you kept this from me all these years." "You didn't need to live in my shadow," I told her. "You needed room to make your own story." She looked at me with a pride so unguarded it made my throat tighten. The truth was out now. And as the guests around us shared memories of films and moments from a career I'd quietly folded away, I felt something lift in me. Not the weight of the past, but the relief of knowing that if my daughter had to learn the truth, she was hearing it in the one place where my dignity still stood, unshaken. Alex's eyes found mine from across the room, and for the first time that day, he looked uncertain. It started with one voice, but it didn't stay that way for long. Near the center of the ballroom, a man in a forest green dinner jacket rose to his feet, champagne flute raised high. "To Henry Caldwell," he called, his voice ringing out over the clink of cutlery and the soft murmur of the band. "A real star, and a real father." There was a moment's pause, as if the room collectively decided whether to join in. Then the applause came, swift, unrestrained, and loud enough to make the chandeliers quiver. Chairs scraped back as more guests stood, glasses lifted toward me like tiny golden torches. "To Henry," a woman in midnight blue silk echoed, "for choosing family over fame." The sound rolled through the ballroom like a warm tide, applause swelling into cheers. Guests turned in their chairs to face me, smiling, nodding, raising their glasses. Some were strangers, others I vaguely recognized from earlier polite exchanges at their tables. Now their expressions were different, open, approving, curious in a kind way, rather than the cold appraisal I'd felt when I first arrived. I could feel heat rising to my face, not from embarrassment, but from a rare, quiet pride. It wasn't the kind of attention I'd known in my acting years. This wasn't the roar of a movie premiere or the blinding flash of paparazzi. But it felt richer, warmer. They weren't applauding the costumes or the roles. They were applauding the choice. And then I saw Anna. She was already standing, glass in hand, her eyes locked on me. "To my father," she said, her voice carrying effortlessly across the room. "The strongest, most selfless man I know." The cheers grew louder, the applause longer, and I felt the moment crystallize into something I'd carry for the rest of my life. I set my tray down on a nearby table and inclined my head slightly, acknowledging the toast without stepping into the center. Across from me, Alex sat stiff in his chair. His hand was tight around the stem of his glass, his knuckles pale against the gold rim. He didn't stand. He didn't smile. And for the first time since I'd known him, his expression was uncertain, less the confident, untouchable host, more a young man realizing that the ground under him had shifted. The applause tapered into a low hum of conversation, but the warmth in the air didn't fade. Guests leaned toward each other, trading whispered remarks, pointing in my direction with smiles that no longer felt calculated. That was when I heard a voice I hadn't expected in a lifetime. Well, if it isn't Hank Caldwell stealing the show without even trying. I turned, and there he was, Frank Delaney. His hair was more silver now, his face carved with years, but the twinkle in his eyes was the same one that had charmed actors, producers, and audiences alike. We'd worked together on 2 films in the 90s, and both had changed the trajectory of my career. "Frank," I said, genuinely smiling, "I didn't know you were here." "Friend of the bride's father," he explained, clasping my hands warmly. I was halfway through my dessert before it hit me. That was you. And now that I know, I have to say, Hank, you still have it. The presence, the timing. I could put you on camera tomorrow and you'd own it. I laughed softly. You haven't changed. You still think the world revolves around a movie set. His grin widened. I'm serious. I've got a script, Hank. It's perfect for you. You'd bring half the audience just by showing up. The words stirred something in me. Memories of long days on set, the click of heels on soundstage floors, the way the world seemed to narrow to the director's voice calling action. For a brief second, the glamour shimmered at the edges of my mind. But it was just that, a shimmer, not a pull. "Frank," I said gently, "I'm happy where I am. I have a life I love, even if it's not glamorous. I don't need to go back." He studied me for a moment, then nodded with the knowing smile of someone who'd fought and lost to the same choice. "Then I'll just be grateful I got to see you again. And I'll tell anyone who asks that Henry Caldwell turned me down for the best reason of all." We shared a brief laugh before he was swept away by a cluster of eager guests wanting to shake his hand. When I picked my tray back up, something had changed. People greeted me now when I approached their tables. They asked questions about my films, yes, but also about life now. Some simply said they admired what I'd done for Anna. Even when I refilled a water glass, they looked at me with a kind of respect you can't buy and can't demand. From his place at the head table, Alex watched it all unfold. The easy dominance he'd enjoyed all evening was gone, replaced by a brittle stillness. He was beginning to understand what he'd done, how the "just a waiter" line had boomeranged back at him, shattering the image he'd wanted to project. And I hadn't said a single cruel word in return. The band had just eased into something low and romantic, the kind of music meant for couples to sway to after the formalities were done. The glow from the chandeliers softened the golds and creams of the ballroom until the whole room felt wrapped in warm light. Guests were laughing in small groups, leaning toward each other with the relaxed intimacy that comes only after good food and plenty of champagne. I was stacking empty dessert plates onto a tray when I noticed movement at the head table. Alex was standing, not just standing, composing himself, smoothing the lapels of his suit jacket, the way he did when he wanted the attention of the room. He stepped out from behind the table, his shoes clicking softly against the polished floor. The chatter began to hush in ripples until only the faint hum of the air conditioning remained. He walked to the microphone stand. The band faltered and faded into silence. Heads turned. A few curious whispers floated up from the back. I kept my eyes on him, not out of challenge, but because something in his expression was different. He took hold of the microphone with both hands, inhaled deeply, and let his gaze sweep across the room before it came to rest squarely on me. "I owe someone here an apology," he began, his voice clear but quieter than I'd ever heard it. "Earlier this evening, I said something unkind, disrespectful. I believed I understood dignity, but tonight I realized I was wrong." The room stilled even more, as though everyone was leaning in. This man, Henry, is not just anything. He is grace. He is strength. He is someone who walked away from a career most of us would dream of, not because he had to, but because he chose to put his family first. That choice, that sacrifice, is the kind of dignity I hope I can live up to. A murmur of agreement rippled through the guests. Someone near the back even gave a soft, approving clap. Alex's eyes stayed on me. "Henry, I don't want us to be at odds. I want us to start fresh, to build something real together, Will you accept my apology and be part of this family with me?" For a long moment, I didn't move, not to make him sweat, though some might have, but because I was weighing my answer in the silence of my own heart. I thought about the sting of his earlier words, the way he had looked at me when I first arrived, and the public attempt to diminish me. I thought about Anna, her face when the truth of my past had come out, the pride in her eyes. Then I set down my tray, smoothed my apron, and stepped forward. I stopped a foot away from him, extended my hand, and met his gaze without flinching. He reached for it. His fingers were cool, his grip steady but not forceful. The applause began almost immediately, softer than before, but warmer, a sound full of approval rather than spectacle. And then Anna was there, moving between us, an arm slipping around my shoulders. She looked at me with that same unguarded pride, then turned to Alex. Without hesitation, he placed his free hand on her arm. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't some fairy tale reconciliation. But in that moment, we were choosing the possibility of something better. From the front table, Sophia, Anna's cousin, stood with a smile that could have lit the whole ballroom. She crossed the floor quickly, her dress swaying, and wrapped both arms around me and Alex, drawing us in until Anna was pulled into the embrace too. "Now this," Sophia announced, her voice carrying over the crowd, "is what a wedding is supposed to be about." The guests laughed, cheered, and raised their glasses again. The band struck up a brighter tune this time, one that seemed to loosen the air itself. People began to dance, not in the polite, formal way of earlier, but with genuine joy. The tension that had hovered at the edges all night seemed to dissolve, replaced by something warmer and stronger, something that felt like the real heart of a family celebration. As I stood there with my daughter and her new husband, I realized that forgiveness, like acting, was a choice. And tonight, I had chosen my role carefully. The celebration didn't just pick up after the apology, it transformed. Where before there had been polite laughter and measured smiles, now there was warmth that spilled over like champagne foam. The band found a livelier rhythm. Children darted between tables, chasing each other with harmless shrieks, and the smell of coffee and sweet liqueur hung pleasantly in the air. Alex was still at the microphone, the light catching the sharp lines of his suit. He looked out at the room, not scanning for approval, but truly seeing the people before him. He raised his glass again, and this time there was no performance in his expression, only sincerity. "I have one more toast," he began, his voice carrying with ease. "To Henry, not just my wife's father, but the man who shaped her into the woman I love. He taught her what loyalty, kindness, and resilience look like, and tonight he's taught me the real meaning of family." There was no hesitation this time. Glasses went up all over the room, some guests even standing. The applause was genuine, warm, almost protective. I felt it move through me, not as the heady thrill of being watched as an actor, but as the steady affirmation of being known as a person. Alex set down his glass and stepped away from the microphone. He crossed the floor to where I stood, still holding my tray, and stopped in front of me. "Dance with me?" he asked quietly. For a moment I glanced down at my uniform, the black waistcoat snug at my sides, the crisp white shirt, the apron strings tied neatly at my back. It wasn't ballroom attire. In another time, another place, I might have declined, letting my appearance excuse me from such a public gesture. But that hesitation lasted only a breath, because tonight they weren't looking at a uniform. They were looking at me. I set the tray on a nearby table, wiped my palms discreetly against the apron, and placed my hand in his. The room seemed to take a collective breath. The band leader caught the cue and let the musicians slide into a slow, sweeping waltz, the kind that wraps around you like velvet. As Alex led me to the center of the polished floor, a light cheer rose from the guests, joined by the clinking of glasses in encouragement. Our first steps were tentative, as if we were both aware of the symbolism. Alex's grip was light, his gaze meeting mine with something unspoken, perhaps relief, perhaps gratitude. By the second turn, the awkwardness faded. We found the rhythm together, moving as the music carried us, our footsteps soft against the floor. Around us, the guests watched without judgment, only smiles. I caught sight of Anna near the head table, her arms folded, pride written openly across her face. She wasn't just seeing her father dancing with her husband. She was seeing the bridge that had been built between them in the space of a single evening. "You didn't have to say yes," Alex murmured as we pivoted. "I did," I said softly, "because we're family now. And family doesn't grow stronger by keeping score." His lips pressed together, and for the first time since I'd met him, he didn't seem like the untouchable host. He seemed like a young man trying to get something right. As the waltz reached its swell, I felt the crowd drawing in, their energy wrapping around us. By the final turn, hands clapped in time with the last bars of music. When the song ended, Alex and I stepped apart and turned toward the room together. The applause was immediate. Cheers, whistles, a few guests rising to their feet. The sound wasn't about the dance itself. It was about what it meant. Sophia, dear Sophia, swept in from the side, her energy always a few degrees warmer than anyone else's. She pulled both Alex and me into a firm hug, then extended an arm to loop Anna into it as well. "Now this," she declared loudly, "is what a wedding is supposed to be about." The crowd erupted, some guests banging their palms on the tables in good-humored applause. The music picked up again, brighter this time, and the dance floor filled with couples. I stepped back, reclaiming my place at the edge of the room. I was still in my waiter's uniform, my hair smoothed back, my shoes practical and worn from hours of moving between tables. But it didn't matter. Not to me, and not to anyone watching. Because they no longer saw me as just a waiter. They saw me for what I had always been, a loving, worthy father. And in that moment, under the golden glow of the chandeliers, I realized that was the only role I had ever truly cared to keep.